Good afternoon and welcome to the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm Senator Tom Brewer, representing the 43rd Legislative District, and I am the chair of this committee. The committee will take up bills in the order that they are posted on the agenda, and those are LB 925 with Senator Aguilar, then LB 1169 with Senator Erdman, and the last one is LB 887, which is mine. Our hearing today is your public part of the legislative process. This is your opportunity to express your position on the proposed legislation before us. Committee members will come and go during the hearing. This is just part of the process. They will be introducing bills in other committees. Ask you that you abide by the following procedures today. First, I would ask that you would be sure and silence your electronic devices or phones. The introducing senator will make the initial statement, followed by proponents, opponents, and those in the neutral. Closing remarks will be reserved for the introducing senator. If you're planning to testify today, we would ask that you fill out one of the green sheets, have it completed and ready when you come forward. Turn that into the committee clerk or one of the pages. We'd ask that you take the time, fill it out so that we can legibly read it. And that will make documentation of everything a whole lot easier. If you're here today and you want to record your presence but not testify, there are gold sheets over there. I ask that you fill those out. All right. If you have handouts, we'd ask that you provide 12 copies. If for some reason you don't, let us know. We can have the pages make additional copies. When you come to testify, we'd ask that you would speak into the microphone and state and then spell them. Again, this is to put in the official record. Today we'll be using the light system. You will have 3 minutes. You'll have the green light for amber light for 1 minute. When the red light comes on, your time is expired. If you don't notice the red light, there will be an audible alarm. When the audible alarm goes off, if you haven't stopped, you will then. No displays of support or opposition to bills, vocal or otherwise, will be allowed by the audience. Committee members with us today will introduce themselves, starting on my right.
Good afternoon, Rita Sanders, representing District 45, which is the Bellevue Offutt community.
Ray, you want to just do yours?
Senator Ray Aguilar, District 35, City of Grand Island.
John Lowe, District 37, Gibbon, Shelton, and Concord.
Good afternoon, Senator Steve Howland, District 33, which is Adams, Kearney, and Phelps County. And 33 is the heart of South Central Nebraska.
All right. The committee legal counsel is Dick Clark, committee clerk Julie Conham. The vice chair of this committee is Senator Sanders. With that, we will introduce our pages. Cameron, there he is on the corner there, political science major in history, UNL senior from Omaha. Next to him, Kristen, she's a political science senior, UNL from North Platte. All right, Ray, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer, and members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. My name is Senator Ray Aguilar. That's spelled R-A-Y-A-G-U-I-L-A-R, representing District 35. As policymakers, we should attempt to avoid discrimination against Nebraska companies and provide consequences for those who practice this type of discrimination. This bill prohibits state and local governments entities from entering into a contract with a company that has a policy or practice that discriminates against the firearm industry businesses because they are part of the firearm industry or a firearm trade association. Many successful businesses in the firearm and ammunition industries have faced discrimination by providers of financial services or insurance companies due to the very nature of their legal and regulatory compliant business. Some of the largest and most powerful corporations in the country are looking to use power to financially cripple the firearms, ammunition, and shooting sports industry, as well as other industries. Based largely on the political or social views their corporate leadership. With respect to the firearms industry, private corporations are using their economic position of power to restrict a constitutionally protected right in a manner that would be impermissible. This legislation would give awareness to whether these companies have a policy that discriminates and provides that government entities preferentially contract with a non-discriminatory service provider if a reasonably competitive service is available. Following my introductions, you will hear from the Director of Government Relations and State Affairs of the Firearm Industries Trade Association that can explain more on the history of this issue, and a constituent who to share locally how it's affected them. I also have an amendment I would like the committee to consider in order to clarify that the government entities that are considering contracts with businesses may still use the company that, that offers a bid because no reasonably competitive alternative exists. And the duties of the government entity cannot reasonably be met through other means. That's the nature of the beast here, and I'll be glad to try to answer any questions you have.
All right, thank you, Ray, for that opening. Let's see if we have questions. Any questions for Senator Aguilar? Senator Lowe?
Thank you. Senator Aguilar, who brought you the bill and what's their reasoning?
Well, I had a meeting with the local constituent who owns an ammunition factory, and he explained the situation to me and brought in other people to more or less talk about the situation and explain how bad it really was. And it's very difficult, especially when it comes to getting insurance.
All right, thank you.
All right, additional questions for Ray? All right, Senator Aguilar, you'll close?
Yes, I will.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to start with proponents. I think we have one identified from the firearms industry. Come on up. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Nephi Cole. That's Nephi Cole. I'm the Director of Government Relations and State Affairs for the Firearms Trade Association of America, the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We represent over 10,000 manufacturers, retailers, distributors, and other businesses in the firearms industry. If companies make a choice to have a discriminatory policy against the Second Amendment, they should have to tell you about it. If you can, you should do business with someone else. That's what this bill does. We're here to support LB 925 because our members have a history of being discriminated against by financial and other services. In 2013, the Obama administration senior officials leveraged corporate America's banking industry to harm our industry in a destructive operation. The goal was denial of financial services to our industry. They used officials at the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to penalize companies for doing business with our legal entities. Those performed industry contracts without explanations. Some maintained relationships but demanded new collateralization or charged higher rates for standard services. Damage was done. Businesses were lost. Those levels of discrimination to a large degree became baked in. Brought investigation and congressional oversight. And the FDIC issued a letter suggesting that they abandon the categorical approach that they had been pushing and that companies take a risk-based approach in assessing individual customers' relationships rather than declining to provide banking services to entire categories of customers. But groups of activist shareholders saw this potential and they expanded that corporate activism. In 2018, a number of too big to fail mega banks pushed by activists announced social policies that included firearms-related prohibitions, policies meant to limit the right to keep and bear arms, curtail lawful commerce, and prejudicially increase costs to the firearms industry. That harm was not theoretical. It is real, it happened, and it's happening. Those companies have said, and we agree, they have a right to determine their policies. But so should you. Just like they can choose who they will do business with, so should you. LB 925, the bill is simple. If a company has a Second Amendment discrimination policy, they have to tell you. That company now moves to the back of the line in contracting. If there is no reasonable competitive option, you can use the discriminatory company still. Please make asking that question part of how you do business. Then do business with companies that don't discriminate against the Second Amendment. Please move LB 925 forward.
All right, thank you for your testimony. The handouts that came, can you break out? I see the first one is from the U.S. Senate with a list of senators. Evidently, they have signed on to something very similar to this.
So what you have before you is you have three different documents. The first document, or in no particular order, one document details Operation Choke Point and acknowledges from the Department of Justice. And it also gives the guidance to telling entities that they think that they should stop. The second document that you have from the Senate is from the pandemic era, and it shows you that discrimination continues, that it hasn't gone away. It's a real thing. It should stop. And then the final document you have is a letter from one of the largest, most successful companies in the firearms industry, Sig Sauer, detailing how they have faced discrimination in financial services.
All right, thank you. Let's see real quick. We got questions for you. Questions? Senator Lowe.
Just a quick one. I was writing when you first introduced yourself. Could you please reintroduce yourself again?
My name is Nephi Cole. I'm the Director of Government Relations and State Affairs for NSSF, which is the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is the Firearms Trade Association of America.
Thank you.
If we take what has been happening with the firearms industry, if we look across the board at other businesses, is there anyone else that's affected that they have the same type of targeting of a particular group in business? Like, the firearms industry only in a different capacity, something else, whether it be, whatever. Is this
Mr.
unique, or is this something that's commonly done targeting certain groups?
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I guess that's a difficult question to answer. It's fairly unique, I can say that. So the firearms industry, really, we're the test case where there are other entities that are beginning to see this and have seen it, entities including things like fossil fuel companies, including agriculture and others. What we can say is that we know that it happens, and it's happening to us right now. We have the skid marks, so we can show that it's occurring. And it's, in many cases, it's part of a larger suite of policies known as ESG policies.
All right, let's see if there's any other questions. All right, thank you for your testimony. Well, welcome back to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer, and good afternoon. Chairman Brewer and the members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. Thank you for your service and all you do for the state. My name is Ken Shills, spelled Kenschilz. I'm testifying before you today as a registered lobbyist for the National Shooting Sports Foundation. As a lifelong resident of Nebraska and an outdoor enthusiast myself, I would like to testify in favor of LB 925. The bill, if passed into law, will be an important line in the sand for the protection of Nebraska's longtime culture of hunting and Second Amendment advocates. Growing up in Western Nebraska, I grew up with firearms, whether it be for hunting, target shooting, or trap shooting, which I participated in from my adolescent and high school years through my time in college and even up till now. Nebraskans have always taken great pride in raising their families to respect and handle firearms safely as they participated in the shooting sports that are available to us here in Nebraska. To that end, is it important that Nebraska companies such as Hornady and Cabela's, along with many other entities and institutions that promote and provide firearms, ammunition, safety training, and shooting sports opportunities, be treated fairly as they go about their businesses. Unfortunately, firearms-related companies have found it increasingly difficult to obtain financing, insurance, and other business-related services. Nebraska has affirmatively protected the rights to bear arms and the culture of hunting and fishing in its Constitution. It is important that we continue to protect these interests in our state contracting. LB 925 provides the transparency necessary to ensure that Nebraska does business with those whose values align with ours when possible. With that, I would ask for your support of LB 925 and that you vote it out of committee to the floor for debate by the full legislature. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify. And there are representatives here from firearm-related companies that will come before you to testify today. And with that, I would be happy to try and answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Ken. Let's see if we have any questions. Questions, Senator Lowe?
Do you know, are these industries, are they aware that their concerns are discriminatory toward the industries?
You know, I can't speak for any of them, but I see, you know, in other things that we've watched go down this path. We saw some of this last year when Senator Slama was working on ESG stuff, environment, social governance kind of policies, and we see that coming down the same kind of pipeline as what we're seeing here today. So I would say that some may be aware, and some may be just doing what they have to do to keep their businesses open that they have as well. So it could be some of both.
Thank you.
All right, additional questions for Ken? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
We're still on proponents to LB 925. Steve, welcome to the Government Committee.
That's an interesting process. I've never seen this done before. My name's Steve Hornady, STEVEHORNADY. Chairman Brewer, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, thank you for giving me this opportunity to testify. I'm president of Hornady Manufacturing, located in Grand Island, the heart of central Nebraska. Thank you to Senator Aguilar for introducing this legislation to help protect members of the firearms and ammunition industry from financial discrimination. As Nephi described, discrimination of all kinds, not just financial, has been promoted and supported against my industry at the very highest levels of our government. Because of that, 5 other states have passed legislation similar to 925, and there are several other states that are currently where it has been introduced. My company employs over 1,200 of your constituents in the heart of central Nebraska, and our employees come from 50 communities ranging from Ord to Blue Hill to Kearney to Fullerton, encompassing 15 counties in central Nebraska. Financial discrimination against my company impacts the employment of your constituents. Last year, during our insurance renewal process, our property carrier notified us that they would have to put limits on our coverage, due in part to other catastrophic weather-related challenges in the United States, and in part because we had begun to outgrow their capacity. So we were forced to go to the market for proposals to cover our growth. We felt if we went to market on our metal processing operations that do not handle any explosives, that we would be more likely to receive competitive bids. Please understand, these factories are 6 miles away from our ammunition factory that handles explosives. We only requested property and casualty proposals on the metals manufacturing part of our business, which is the same as any other metal manufacturing business. We asked 24 carriers for quotes, and we got zip. 24, no quote. Despite the fact that we have a stellar loss history, despite the fact that we're in a highly regulated industry where we have exceptionally high safety standards, despite the fact they had no exposure to explosives of any kind, 100% of the carriers refused to quote, with 20 of them specifically citing class of business as their reason. The class wasn't metal forming or machining either. When we inquired further, we were told that it was not the fact that Hornady manufactures ammunition, it was risk associated with inherent non-political risks of the manufacture of products. If the amount of property had a lower value or did not include such specialized risk, very likely they would have quoted. What risk? There is no specialized risk beyond that of any standard metals manufacturing operation. When our broker marketed these properties, he was told specifically that ammunition manufacturing was a prohibited class of business. No matter what the exposure was, they could not offer terms. Hornady has been discriminated against by credit card processors that refuse to process state of sales of ammunition or would only do so by adding a surcharge above our standard rates. We have also, I think I have to shut up.
Go ahead and finish. I'll let you finish.
We've also had software vendors terminate contracts or refuse to quote projects because of our class of business. And a particular example is when we had found an ideal software company for a special challenge. That company's credit card partner learned of the relationship and forced that software company to withdraw their quote from doing business with us because we're in the ammunition industry. I can terminate this discussion or my letter at that time.
All right, well, we probably need to get a little better understanding of things before we let you go here, because you're kind of our best source of information, especially on the industry. Now, Hornady Manufacturing, a little history, kind of the Reader's Digest version. You go back to
1949. This is our 75th anniversary.
And been in Grand Island the whole time. You would gradually kind of worked into some of the adjoining communities with different facilities.
Correct. We now have a plant in Alda, which is 8 miles to the west. And then we acquired property from the Cornhusker Army ammunition plant, where we built a new distribution and ammunition assembly operation. And we're now in manufacturer of primers out there as well.
And that you are now managing the range complex too there?
We have just assumed the management of the Heartland Public Shooting Park range in Grand Island.
And as far as to kind of give a snapshot of what happens out there, Grand Island puts on a number of events each year, everything from the zombie shoot to the trap shooting to, is it the 4-H that has their national championships there?
4-H comes and has a national championship, as well as this Scholastic Clay Target Championships in Donovan.
Okay, let's see if we don't have some questions. Questions for Steve? Questions? Yes, Senator Holler.
So in your estimation, I mean, it's going to get to the point where it's just about impossible to do business. I mean, it's hard to do business without insurance.
Correct.
It's hard to do business without updating your software.
Correct.
Borrowing from time to time. I'm sure, like any good business, you have
And credit customer or our consumer wants to order or buy something, and he goes to the local gun store, to a Cabela's or whatever, and wants to use that credit card. If that processor has refused to do that, he doesn't have the correct credit card, he won't be able to buy that product. And we have seen several times where the merchant commerce code, I think I have that wrong, has been used to shut off the sales of ammunition or firearms where the credit card refused to process that transaction. And there's now a movement that's been squelched to create a special merchant category for firearms and ammunition stores that would have allowed basically anyone who had access to the credit card data to be able to determine specifically who had firearms. Now that one got stopped further up the line, but it has come back again, and there is a relatively large bank in the United States that is promulgating that position.
So is it fair to say, in your opinion, that this seems to be rather obvious to most people, but your opinion is important? Does this seem to be orchestrated? In other words, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but having said that, I mean, there is a word such as conspiracy. It does exist in the dictionaries when two or more people conspire to do something, but it seems like there are so few exceptions for you to track some of the needs that you have as a business that it sounds like some people are kind of orchestrating together to work against you. Now, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what's your opinion on it?
I agree.
Okay.
It's, the difficulty, of course, is that a number of these companies and financial institutions at a level far beyond me, the president or the chairman of the board of the Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Liberty Insurance, who happens to be one of my favorite targets right now, poor choice of words perhaps, that, these are the guys that get together in cocktail parties. These are the guys that share boards, company boards or corporate boards back and forth. And there's no question that we see a woke policy that moves through here that chooses to discriminate against a number of industries. Nephi mentioned oil and gas, also some agricultural areas, certainly the firearms ammunition industry. And there are others that are just, we're not popular with the press. We're not popular with the social media. And once they get fired up and they get some activists, a number of these companies just say, you know what, we'll move on. Liberty Biberty is the one that sent us the letter. They canceled our insurance. We asked why. They said there was a change in policy. We asked, okay, what was the change in policy? And we essentially got a Nunya letter that said this was a decision made at our corporate level, and we consider it confidential and proprietary and no further discussion. And that's where they shut it off. Do I think it happened at their boardroom? Sure I do. I think somebody said, just shut them off. This is bad policy. We're prepared to take our chances if my business is a poor risk because the building is falling down or I'm in a flood zone, any one of a number of reasons, that you would use your normal economic decisions to ensure a plant or a business or whatever. But to say, yeah, we don't, it's because of the industry that you're in, we're not going to insure you.
Yes, Senator Lowe.
Thank you. And Mr. Hornaday, thank you for being here. Comes from the best of the Tri-City area in central Nebraska.
I do have the other part of the best of the central part.
Some of your customers, they're reputable customers, are they not?
Yes,
Many government agencies.
yes,
And you've taken as many precautions as you can to keep your employees, your building, your facility, everything safe.
yes,
So you're not an outlier out there.
no.
Are most all the firearms and ammunition companies at this point in time going through similar situations like this?
I can't speak for most. A number of the larger ones, for instance, Winchester or Federal, are very large, multi-billion-dollar corporations who are in a position to certainly to self-insure themselves for their properties and some other liability issues. And a tremendous amount of what we're doing here, or what we're trying to do here, is not so much to protect me, but to protect the other people that are smaller businesses that are trying to get started, the dealer or the retailer, the wholesalers that just want to have an opportunity to create a small business and come up, and they get shut off by credit card processor first, and they have to start scrambling around to find someone who will let them handle that, or their bank that says, we just don't think we want to be supporting a retailer that does business in firearms and ammunition. And they have to scramble to find that. And they don't have those resources. They have to have the support of a bank. They have to have the support of an insurance company. They have to be covered. And that's why we're here. It's for those people.
Yes, Senator Lowe.
I know we've just come through a period of time where it's been hard to find ammunition at the stores and everything. If American companies don't make that ammunition, where does it come from?
Some from Europe, and that's it. There isn't any other place. It won't come from Russia, certainly now. It can't come from China, and you wouldn't want it if it could. America is the largest manufacturer of the variety of products that we have today.
Well, and I guess a point I'd like to make here with that is that you have businesses that make money and you have businesses that make money and they contribute to the community. And that's something I've always been very impressed with Hornady, because whether it's the youth programs, whether it be with and you guys impact from there all the way to the point where your 300 PRC round was what we were using in Syria with the Army. Grand Island without Hornady is a much lesser place. Hall County without Hornady is a much lesser place. Nebraska without Hornady is a much lesser place. So I guess what we want to do is make sure that we don't miss an opportunity to protect the companies that do the good things here. So for what you do for the youth, what you do for the communities, thank you. Let me see if we have any more questions. All right.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, we're on proponents, LB 925. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you for having me, Chairman Brewer and members of the committee. My name is John Heaston, JOHNHEASTON, and I am the Executive Director of the Nebraska Sportsman's Foundation. And before I begin, I would like you to know I am from Elm Creek, which is the one true liver of the Tri-Cities area. And the Tri-Cities being Elm Creek, Odessa, and Funk. With Hastings, Grand Island, and Kearney being nice little suburbs. That aside, let me take a moment to ask you to consider supporting LB 925 and moving it to the floor for a general vote. Representing the Nebraska Sportsman's Foundation, its membership, we know that Nebraska has long been a great place to hunt, trap, fish, and over those years, those passions have fueled a lot of local industries in the firearms accessories industry in our state and beyond. And these industries bring countless dollars to our state. The men and women who manufacture, sell, and or donate these firearms and related products provide a critical product and service to our outdoor communities. These companies have become job creators in their communities and strong supporters of local charities. They are also great ambassadors for our state as their products find new markets beyond our borders. Issues relating to firearms have become controversial in our culture and political worlds. And with the ease of that information can spread in our society, firearm affiliated groups and industries can become the focus of discriminatory campaigns that can affect more than just the company or the group target. Our First Amendment rights are guaranteed of free speech, and that right is sacred, but targeting specific companies or groups based on the premise of guilt by association is an unfair use of those First Amendment rights. Asking those groups to be identified will help government, industry, and the general public to know who they are interacting with and if continuing to do so serves the greater good. As the firearm-related industries and manufacturers grow and prosper in our state, we should do all that we can to recognize the importance of their efforts and give them a way to distinguish themselves as business leaders, helping to strengthen and diversify Nebraska's economy by providing high-quality tools and accessories to the citizens of our state, to all who should come here and hunt, fish, and trap, or shooting sports. Thank you for your consideration. I would answer any questions if you have them.
All right, thank you, John. Let's see if we got any questions for you. Questions? All right.
All right, thank you
your
for
testimony.
having me.
Okay, next proponent to LB 925. Come on up. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Hello, Senator.
Hand off the green sheet.
It's Randy Bendorf, B as in boy, ENDORF. Been following this for quite a while, probably last 5-6 years, especially looking at the merchant code situation. Had some friends high up at the local bank here in town, which I used to be a VP of their investments department, but just heard that rumbling that they were jumping on the bandwagon to have some discriminatory practices against ammunition industries. And watching that merchant code, who I know Mr. Hornady said it's been staved off for a little while, but they've definitely implemented that and are definitely tracking it. We saw this with regulatory on lead ammunition. Now we've seen it, gun grabbers are going after 5.56 ammunition that came out of the Army's Lake City plant, which always sold their excess inventory, saying that they're all involved in mass shootings, so they had to shut that civilian access down. Anyway, they can circumvent our Civil Rights Second Amendment, state Constitution, federal Constitution. They're going at just another avenue for heavy political practices to come after the law-abiding citizen. And I have been following for quite a while, and it's good to hear Mr. Hornady pointing it out. And just hearing rumblings from my friends, a very good friend of mine works over in Belgium at NATO, and that's one of their objectives is to circumvent our firearms industry by removing parts and or ammunition or both, because they haven't been successful at anything else. So anyways, just definitely supportive of it. Thank you.
All right. We brought up the issue of Lake City. So the
Yeah.
last I heard, the plan for Lake City is that they will close Lake City depending on whether or not they can shift the remaining production to another location. Is that, just so everyone knows, Lake City Army Ammunition Plant at one time was one of the bigger producers of small arms ammunition. That's being shifted some, and that's where the excess ammunition you said was originally being sold. Now they're retracting that to not do that in the future because of it being associated with certain events.
Yeah, and there's no statistic support of it, like Dr. John Lott, who's probably the best authority at straight stats. That 5.56 round, which is obviously the most common round, and that's why they're after it. But they said they've traced those rounds to the Lake City plant, which there's no substantiation of any of that. But as far as I know, that's only for military manufacturing now. And part of their excuse too was, well, we need this ammunition in Ukraine. But again, it was just to discriminatory practices and circumvent civilians' access for ammunition.
Okay, before we let you go, let's see if we got any questions for you. Questions for Randy? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thanks, Senator.
Okay, we're still looking at proponents to LB 925. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Chairman, thank you. Chairman Brewer and Senators of the committee. My name is John Ross, John Ross. Senator Aguilar, thank you for introducing this bill. I'm a Vietnam veteran and served proudly to protect the Constitution of this country and our state. A member of the NRA and a hunter education instructor for Game and Parks. There are people that want to chip away at the Second Amendment right any way they can. They have failed most of the time in their attempts to take away the right to own and use firearms in a lawful manner in Nebraska if you are not a prohibited person. This was proven last year when Senator Brewer was able to pass LB 77. Thank you, Senator Brewer. But two communities have passed laws that restrict what was intended in LB 77. Before LB 77 was became law, 91 out of 93 counties in the state of Nebraska passed a resolution to protect the Second Amendment. This is very impressive to me, and I think it should be a strong statement to you. People in this state do not want the Second Amendment trampled on. So they weren't able to take away the constitutional right to keep and bear arms. Let's put businesses that sell firearms, ammunition, firearms parts, accessories, etc., out of business. They also included any associations that represent these businesses. We need to have fair laws in place to protect all the lawful businesses in this state. We do not need to lose any of them, and we should be attractive to new ones, especially ones that are out of state, to come to our state. So I'm asking you to advance Senator Aguilar's bill to keep the playing field level for all businesses and not allow a few that don't like firearms to hinder these businesses. With that, I will conclude.
right, thank you. Let's see if we got any questions for you, John. Questions? Questions? All right, thank you. All right, we're still on 925 proponents. Proponents. All right, we will shift to opponents. 2925. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer and members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. My name is Robert N. Bell. Last name is spelled B-E-L-L. I'm the Executive Director and Registered Lobbyist for the Nebraska Insurance Federation, and I am appearing today in opposition to LB 925. The Nebraska Insurance Federation is a state trade association of insurance companies in Nebraska. Currently, the Confederation consists of 48 member companies and 9 associate members. Member companies write all lines of insurance. One of the goals of the Federation is to promote the concepts and importance of insurance products to the public. But not only do Nebraska insurers provide financial protections to Nebraskans, but insurance companies also have a significant impact on the Nebraska economy. According to a draft study recently completed by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Bureau of Business Research, the insurance industry had a $25.77 billion impact on the Nebraska economy in 2022, including providing over 32,000 jobs to Nebraskans. The average wage of a Nebraskan working in the insurance industry is nearly $92,000 annually. You've already heard what LB 925 does. Our concerns, well, first it's on the government. So much of the government of Nebraska and political subdivisions of the state are either self-insured or they pool their risk in a variety of intergovernmental risk pools, which are quasi-public entities that compete against private insurers. Many of these entities have reinsurance agreements with private insurers or other syndicates that provide coverage in cases of catastrophic loss. The insurer's concerns with LB 925 are that the provisions could effectively shrink the pool of available in reinsurers to the state and political subdivisions, not because insurers discriminate against the firearms industry, but because financial decisions are oftentimes confused with discrimination. Many insurers will write insurance for any legitimate business. Others will limit the scope of their business to certain types of businesses, such as small businesses versus large businesses. Certain mutual insurers will only write businesses that meet their mission of their members, such as churches. Other insurers will only write specialty business that cannot secure insurance in the admitted market. These insurers are called surplus line insurers. Many insurers also limit the amount of coverage that they will provide to a particular business. Most manufacturing in Nebraska, my understanding, exists in surplus lines or non-admitted market versus the admitted market. So it's kind of like the ultimate free market versus the more highly regulated insurance market. The property and casualty insurance market has been very difficult lately due to numerous factors, including catastrophic weather claims. In November of 2023, so just in November, the insured loss due to severe convection storms topped $50 billion annually for the first time in the United States. And this has led to a trend that has caused reinsurers to rethink their approach to reinsurance and deploying of capital. I have a little bit more to say, but I see I'm out of time. So for those reasons, we oppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's back up.
Sure.
Okay. I appreciate the 92,000 you make each and all that kind of stuff and the 50 billion. But what I'm trying to understand is if we just look at a free market economy and Steve Horney says, I'd like to have some bids on my insurance.
Right.
If you're in one of those categories where you don't really deal with that, then you don't put a bid in. But what we're trying to do is figure out why would you, as a group, as a blanket statement, say we don't like this bill because we want to be able to discriminate who we do business with. Help me fill out the sentence.
Well,
there.
no. So I think you got to look at how the bill works. And so the bill works by you have to file a piece of paper with a state agency, the Department of Administrative Services, state contract, or the political subdivision, if it's the local government, and it says, we do not discriminate. And then you look at other provisions of this proposed law, and it says, okay, well, we don't have a policy, but we think in practice you do discriminate. And so somebody could complain to that political subdivision or state agency and say, well, I know they don't have a policy, and the insurer is going to write that they don't have that policy. They're in this business, right? I mean, maybe not necessarily the firearm business. There's probably some that are, but certainly in the oil and gas industry, many large insurers are involved in those types of industries. And then you got complaints against them. And then are you in violation of the statute? And, you know, that's really our concern. It's not so much that we're afraid to put a piece of paper across the desk and say, hey, we're not discriminating. It's that we don't have a policy of discrimination. It's this perceived notion that financial considerations are somehow discriminatory against the firearms industry, when many businesses in the state of Nebraska are having a difficult time securing commercial property insurance right now.
All right, let's see if we got questions. Senator Holler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I find it kind of odd that, I mean, you suggested that the question would be to a company, to an insurer, do you have a discriminatory policy?
Right.
Well,
That's what the bill requires.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But it's a yes or no question.
Right.
You do or you don't.
And
right?
we
So-
would say no,
Right.
unless a company did, right?
You would say no unless you do.
Yeah, right. But most companies are going to say no. But it's not just, do you have a policy, or there's also the practice, right? So like you could slide that paper over and say, no, we do not. And then somebody could complain to whether or not that's the state or political subdivisions, like, oh yeah, but they denied all of these,
But I think that's an important point, right? So if you say no, we do not have a discriminatory policy, and then someone challenges that,
Mhm.
well, if you don't have a discriminatory policy, you got no problem.
Well, we have an expensive problem probably in a court of law.
Well, I'm comfortable that your industry could afford a few attorneys.
And we,
Probably.
no doubt, I think I'm gonna go testify on that later today.
Well,
So,
but I'm sure you have quite a few
yes, we
on
do.
call all the time, right? So it won't cost much more if you clearly are discriminating.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I understand your point, Senator Haller. We certainly do employ a lot of attorneys in our industry, and we would rather not have that risk. We'd rather just have
But see,
the market take care of itself.
but you're in the business of insuring against risk. So
Correct.
I know you can't insure against that risk,
Mhm.
but you can insure against it by just not discriminating.
And we don't believe that we do.
Okay. Well, then you probably wouldn't have an issue.
I think other people think that we do, and they would challenge that. That's the heart of the law.
But the world's full of those kind of
That is true.
challenges. So I
Correct.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Right, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair,
All right.
and thank you for being here, Mr. Bell. And I think maybe just to follow up on my friend Senator Halloran's question, because I feel like maybe we're conflating policy and legal issues maybe in this discussion a little bit. And maybe it would be helpful for the committee and others to be more precise as we work through the issues here, and without taking a stance on either side of this. And I appreciate what Senator Aguilar is trying to do
Yes.
on behalf of his constituents, who we all recognize have an important place in our economy in
They do.
Nebraska. But could you maybe just take a moment, and I know it's a big question to unpack, but if you could maybe help the committee understand the difference between discrimination and risk? Because I think that there's maybe we're talking past each other a little bit in this conversation, and maybe that would help to clarify where
Yeah,
we're at.
thank you.
and
Thank you very much.
what your perspective
And let me
is.
take a moment.
Okay.
So, and I think Mr. Hornady, when he was testifying, talked about capacity and weather on the insurer that they had.
Okay, yeah.
And that's an issue right now for many very large businesses in Nebraska. So if you have a lot of risk, so tens of millions of dollars worth of property, which I'm sure they probably do. There are insurers that are unwilling to write over certain amounts because of their own financial capacity and the duty that they have to their other clients as well. Doesn't matter what necessarily may be going on in that property, but the amount of property within that's just risk, and how much capital does an insurance company have. And so if their broker went out to a company and said, hey, would you be willing to write that? And they're like, oh, we're only going to write risk up to $50 million as an example. That I'm sure their properties are worth well more than that, right? So, and so that would be, for us, would be a financial decision, right? And if numerous companies said that, it could look like a conspiracy or some antitrust going on, which, you know, it's not necessarily the case. It's just they're unwilling to take on that financial risk. So.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, additional questions, Senator Wolf?
Thank you. Before I ask the question, could you briefly finish your introductory, because you said you had a little bit more?
I can if you want, but and I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Senator Lowe. And you know, what I was going to say, it's just a decision. It not unlike Senator Conrad asked me, you know, what's a financial decision versus, you know, quote unquote discrimination. That is, for us, weather has been the issue. Severe convection storms have been an issue in our state. No property and casualty insurer in our state has made money in the last 4 to 5 years. And I don't expect anybody to cry any tears for our companies. They're doing well. They're still writing business, but they are lowering their limits. They are increasing their premiums because they have paid more in claims. So I think I had a company tell me, and then I'll finish because I know I'm just kind of battling on here. Usually in early November is when you don't see any more losses in weather-related losses in Nebraska because it changes. On December 15th of 2021, 2021 was not the greatest year to begin with for property and casualty companies. And then a gigantic storm hit eastern Nebraska that I think went from South Dakota to Kansas, swept across the middle of the United States and caused $1.5 billion worth of insured losses across the Midwest. Nebraska was certainly part of that. Number of tornadoes and other things. These things lead to higher prices, and it makes it more difficult, the more risk that you have to secure the insurance. I went way on beyond a minute and a half. My apologies.
Isn't that part of doing business?
Yeah.
With your industry,
right?
Is risk.
There is.
And that's why these companies got into that.
Absolutely.
For risk.
Right.
Because the premiums that they charge their customers should help overcome some of that risk.
Right. And then they change the following year when they rewrite their policies. They increase the premiums, they lower the limits, they look at their capacity and say, okay, if this happened again, do we have the financial wherewithal to pull that off? And you know, unfortunately, a great employer like Hornady and Grand Island has been caught in the middle of that, where they have so much risk and so much property because they're successful, right? That they're unable to get the amount of coverage that they would like for the prices that they would like, and so they may have to self-insure or do something like that, not because they're an ammunition manufacturing plant, but because of the risk involved.
I would think that the premiums that the Hornady manufacturing would pay could offset some of those risks.
Sure. Yeah. If they're willing to pay those premiums. Again, we're talking about almost kind of two different things. We have the admitted market of insurance, which is highly regulated by the state of Nebraska. Forms, rating systems, everything like that has to be filed with the Department of Insurance. Then we have surplus lines insurance, is non-admitted market. It's kind of like the ultimate free market of insurance. The insurer fails for whatever reason, there's no protections. You don't have to file all your forms and rating system. As a business and the insurance company to sit down and negotiate whatever that is. That's more expensive at the end of the day. And what I'm hearing from my insurers on very large amounts of risk, over $50 million, that's where they want to sit down with the business and write that out in the non-admitted market. So
Where does Mr. Hornaday go then to get help?
he goes to the non-admitted market, which I'm sure he's looked in. So.
Okay, other questions? The point I think he made, though, that I thought did have some validity is that when he talked about his metals part of that. So if you have a factory and you're spitting out widgets, you're good to go. But if you have a factory and you're spitting out, separate from your gunpowder and all the rest, you're spitting out metal pieces, shell casings, dies, whatever. But it's uninsurable because of what it is, not because of the fact they're stamping out metal.
It's not, it may be insurable. It's just how much premium do you want to pay on it? All right. And yeah, so it doesn't have the explosive, which again, I think we can all agree if you're dealing with explosives, that's hazardous, especially hazardous.
It's been my experience.
Yeah. And if you're just doing metal, let's say all of their metal shops, let's say that's $75 million worth of property and all of the equipment that's inside the building, all of that. You grab insurance on the admitted market for that, just because the amount of property and the amount of risk is so high. So.
Well, you have got a lot of questions. You gave us a lot of answers. So thank you for your testimony.
I appreciate it. Dave, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, boy. We're going to have some fun now. Bob, welcome to the Government Committee.
That may be in the eye of the beholder. Chairman Brewer, members of the committee, my name is Robert J. Holstrom, Hallstrom, here before you today on behalf of the Nebraska Bankers Association in opposition to LB 925. I want to begin by noting that our opposition to LB 925 is in no way a statement against the firearms industry or Hornaday, but rather opposition to the intervention of government into the free market system. We believe LB 925 represents a solution in search of a problem. We have in the Banking Committee last session consistently opposed anti-ESG legislation. Senator Aguilar sat through those hearings and heard Senator Jacobson ask each and every individual witness when there were questions about potential discrimination or not doing business with fossil fuels companies, firearms industry, and the whole laundry list of things. And each and every witness without exception said, banks are not a problem in Nebraska. So maybe we have to put something on the books to be preemptive. We don't think so. Legislation designed to make a political statement should not be utilized to disrupt the normal operation of the free market system or to place local municipalities at great risk of incurring significant cost in issuing bonds, which has been the result in the few states in which firearms industry non-discrimination or fossil fuels non-discrimination legislation has been enacted. In my testimony, I've got a reference to a Wharton School of Business study that reflected that adverse impacts in the bond market in Texas cost Texas $532 million. Someone from the Shooting Sports Foundation suggested that that was a one-time hit. Whether it's a one-time hit or an annual hit, and we think it's an annual hit, that's not chump change. In Oklahoma, which had a fossil fuels non-discrimination law, the city of Stillwater had to refinance a $13.5 million project because a particular institution had been debanked, costing it $1.2 million. We think our customers should prosper and succeed, including firearms businesses, but banks don't want government telling them who they should and shouldn't do business with. Cornerstone in a free market system, particularly with regard to the banking industry, is we believe that banks should be free to lend to, invest in, and generally do business with any entity or activity that is legal, to choose not to, as long as they're not doing it on a discriminatory basis. In my testimony, I have mentioned the certification. Senator Halloran asked the question, if you're not discriminating, why don't you just file the paper? That would be an easy out, but we found in the state of Texas, for example, the Attorney General, on top of the certification of compliance, required standing letters of non-discrimination. Some banks have filed certificates of satisfaction or compliance, and they have been told, they've been challenged by the National Sports Foundation, Shooting Sports Foundation, and it's had an adverse impact on the bond market there. I see my time is up. I had some more things to say, but I'll address any questions that the committee might have.
Well, we kind of need to probably finish hearing you out here because what you're saying is tracking with what we need to know. So
I appreciate that, Senator. I think the other things that, one of the things that I think the banking industry in particular has a conundrum with is, where does this start and stop? We've seen the anti-ESG bills last session that came at us and said, whether it's fossil fuels, firearms, you can look at LB 730 and see the laundry list of things we're not supposed to do. What if something comes from the other end of the political spectrum? What if a bill said, thou shalt not discriminate against green energy firms? We flip the tables, we turn the tables in terms of what different people think is right or wrong. Some of the issues that we look at, and one of the interesting things in this bill, different than Texas, is that it provides an exception for investment services. Well, what does that mean at the end of the day? What it means in a nutshell is we'll overlook the fact that we think some people that are working with us in the investment services arena are arguably or allegedly discriminating against someone. What does that mean specifically to Nebraska? You may have seen the Nebraska Investment Council recently has taken positive action because there was quite a bit of pushback because they're using a company named BlackRock. I'm not here to throw BlackRock under the bus, but it's been public. What the Investment Council has done is they have reduced the investments over which BlackRock has control by 50%, and they've outsourced their proxy voting. I think those are both positive things in terms of the entire overall ESG arena. But what this bill says is, notwithstanding the fact that we think, or people have alleged, that BlackRock is engaging in discriminatory activity, in fact, they were the impetus probably for the anti-ESG legislative approach, we're going to continue to do business with them because this bill exempts those investment services from its coverage. In closing, I think it's significant. The Arizona legislature adopted legislation similar to LB 925, which was vetoed by Governor Hobbs in Arizona. Her veto message, I think, is very telling. This bill is unnecessary, and if enacted, could result in banks leaving Arizona's market. This would limit competition and increase costs for local governments, which ultimately fall on taxpayers. I once again urge the legislature to focus on providing real solutions to those faced by our state. We believe that analysis would apply equally to the provisions of LB 925. Just in one other issue that I'd address, Senator Brewer, and thank you for your consideration and time here. Witnesses talked about Operation Choke Point. Operation Choke Point is before us. We didn't like what the regulators were doing as a banking industry, and that is now behind us. They've talked about merchant category codes. It's a completely different issue. The banking industry does not like the fact that some international organization is looking at merchant category codes for firearms purchases. So we're not necessarily misaligned on that particular issue. And one final item with regard to the risk versus discrimination aspect that Senator Conrad raised and Senator Lowe in his question. We found out this summer that Nationwide is essentially getting out of the property and casualty market in Nebraska. What that told me, if you're familiar with the commercial, is Nationwide is not on our side. But I don't think anybody has alleged that Nationwide is discriminating against Nebraska businesses because they've chosen to get out of the market in Nebraska. Similarly in Florida, condominium collapsed. Hard to find condominium insurance. They have sinkholes in Florida. Hard to find certain types of insurance. I think it's an issue of risk. Cost of the premiums may be high. Some companies self-insure. I don't want to get into the insurance market, but I'll stop there and appreciate your consideration and giving me a few extra minutes, Senator.
All right. So if we have any questions for Rob, Senator Lowe?
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Bob, for being here.
Thank you.
and for finishing your testimony. It was brought up that the credit cards, early in our testimonies, that they're not allowing them to purchase through these credit cards. Those credit cards go through a banking system. What can be done about that?
Senator, I'd have to look into more on that. I assume Hornaday probably has some affiliation with a bank for its own bank-issued credit card and for purchases. I'd certainly be willing to look more into whether or not there's a real issue with regard to other credit card issuers. And obviously, banks do issue credit cards, but we're looking at the banks we represent in terms of deposit relationships, lending relationships with Hornaday and other types of firearms industry related companies. At a meeting we had this summer, the primary focus, which is why we kind of got a lead that there was going to be a boycott or a blacklisting type of bill that was going to be introduced. The representative from Hornaday at that meeting was very complimentary of its banking relationship with, I assume, a Nebraska bank. So I assume this was about insurance, but we're not here to throw insurance under the bus. Mr. Bell has explained why there's a difference between risk and discrimination, and whether it's the banking industry or the insurance industry, we stand by the merits that we don't think it's an arena for the government to intervene or interject itself.
Well, let's say it's not a Nebraska bank. Let's say it's a national bank that has a credit card, and I go in to try to buy something and I'm not allowed to buy it because it's ammunition. Do you have anything on that?
Well, Senator, I don't know that much about the credit card aspect of Hornaday's issues that they've raised. I think what it boils down to more fundamentally, and Mr. Bell touched on this very appropriately, is when you look at how the Texas law is implemented, how the Nebraska law is drafted, you can profess till the cows come home that you're not discriminating, and you're still going to be subject to having to prove up as to whether or not you've got a discriminatory policy or practice. I might add too, one of the things that struck me as odd, I read the statement of intent on this bill. I heard Senator Aguilar explain how the bill's supposed to work, and the first witness from the Shooting Sports Foundation all talked about this notion that all the bank has to do is tell us what their policy is. That's not what this bill does. This bill says policy, practice, et cetera, and you have to agree to sign on to that on a contract with the state and still be subject to, as we've seen in Texas, secondary challenges even after you've suggested and you believe in your heart of hearts that you are not in fact discriminating against this particular industry.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Bob? Well, since the last few pheasants hunts I've had have been all bankers I've been out with, so I can't accuse you guys of not being pro-gun or shells, I guess. So.
Well, other than the fact, Senator, as I confided in you, my two law partners went with you, and they did not invite me because they figured you had enough risk. Had enough risk outside of me carrying a gun around. So I'm glad you didn't get put into that. So
thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, we are on opponents to LB 925. All right, neutral on LB 925. All right, we'll invite Senator Aguilar to close on 925. While he's doing that, I'll go over our letters. We had 11 proponents, 7 opponents, 0 in the neutral. With that, we will welcome Ray back to close on 925.
Thanks, Senator Brewer. Members of the committee. Like I said at the start, it's a simple bill. It's about fairness and discrimination. And I would contend that if you're an insurance company or you're a financial institution and you're not practicing discriminatory procedures, you really have nothing to worry about. This bill doesn't affect it. It's only the bad players. And it's a pretty sad state of affairs when a company the size of Hornaday, one of the finest companies and largest employers in Grand Island, gets treated in this manner. It's not right. I encourage you to vote green and put this on the floor of the legislature. Thank you.
All right. See if we have any questions for you. We'll let you go. Questions for Senator Aguilar? All right. Thank you, Rick. All right. We're going to quick reset here, set up for the next bill, and invite Senator Erdman up. Well, we're charged to get through the first one in less than an hour for you, but we went a little over. Just got engrossed in the discussion, and I thought it was a good discussion, so we let them go a little longer than I intended. Let's see, we are now on LB 1169, and we will invite Senator Erdman to enlighten us on 1169.
Thank you, Colonel Brewer. Appreciate being here. Thank you, committee. My name is Steve Erdman. I represent District 47. That's spelled SDEVERDMAN. And I'm here today to present to you a bill about History Nebraska Historical Society to convert that to a code agency. I got involved with History Nebraska, Historical Nebraska, whatever you want to call it, several years ago before I became a county commissioner. We have several landmarks in my district, Chimney Rock being one, Court and Jailhouse Rock being the other one. And so we have had issues that dealt with historical Nebraska and History Nebraska over the years. And it came to my attention that some of these things needed attention that was difficult for us to work with that society. And as time grew on, and as we begin to understand the complexity of that agency, we begin to see some of the shortfalls in management in that agency as well. That agency was established back in 1994, in July of 94. And I think when the agency was founded, I think their mission was to record the history and not write history, which is different than it is today. And so as I began to analyze what we need to do to try to bring some common sense approach to management for this agency, it was quite obvious that the best way to do that was make them code agency. And so with the help of some others, we have developed this plan to make History Nebraska become code agency, where the governor will appoint the director and the board members will be advisors to that director. So as I said, it was started in 1994. There are 9 members on the board that are elected by the historical or History Nebraska members. 3 are appointed by the governor. That's a current situation, the way it's set up. The society members appoint their own superintendent or director under the current statutes. Society members are free to accept gifts of money, of real estate, or other issues for History Nebraska. That seems to be part of the problem as well. The history of Nebraska, History Nebraska, is that there has been corruption there for several years. Several years ago, the director that was in place, Tony Schmitz, stole $73,000 from the Historical Society. And just recently, and more common to your understanding, is Trevor Jones. He was a director, and he was charged with transferring $269,000 to another fund that he had set up. So there's nothing new about mismanagement of funds at the Historical Society. So therefore, we need oversight by the state auditor as well as the state treasurer to make sure that these funds are taken care of in an appropriate manner. So the solution, I believe, is LB 1169. It makes the Nebraska Historical Society a code agency created and creating a director who is accountable to the governor and the legislature. The governor will appoint this director, and then they will be approved by the legislature. The director cannot accept gifts over $10,000 without the approval of the governor, and the board of trustees can no longer accept any kind of gifts. This is to be able to control what happens with the money that's given or the items that are given to the Historical Society. The director is forbidden from serving on any other private board who would support the Historical Society. That has been a problem in the past, and this solves that issue if we make it a code agency. The director can no longer transfer funds to a foundation and thus bypass the state treasurer. The state treasurer will have control of the funds. The director would oversee the day-to-day operations of the society. The director would conduct an annual meeting, and the director would have authority to disseminate research and dispose of duplicate materials or materials outside the scope of the society's mission. LB 1169 recreates the Nebraska Historical Society Collection Fund. The fund would be administered by the director. Monies collected for the sale of property owned by the society would be remitted to the state treasurer for deposit or credit into the fund. Excess revenues would be invested according to the Nebraska Capital Expenditure Act and the Nebraska State Funds Investment Act. I have several emails that I have received. I do not want to take the whole amount of time to read to you those emails that I have received about the mismanagement of historical Nebraska. I think there are people behind me who will help explain that. I would like to talk briefly about the fiscal note. The fiscal note basically involves ICIO, and there's going to be someone behind me that will address the fiscal note. So if you have questions about that, we will deal with that at a later date. So this email is from a person who was a former staff member and a life member of the Historical Society, and it states the following. I'm concerned about the fate of history in Nebraska. At least two significant events have shown that the original independence of the society has become an opportunity for individual and grandiosement. First, the chief financial officer of the society used his position to embezzle funds to conceal his activities under the guise of coordinating of the society's finances and according to the requirements of the state law. Once the attempt was exposed, it took a prison sentence to him. He was found guilty, and it took several years for his replacement to rectify the solution. So the situation is that between the Attorney General and the foundation, they have struck a deal, and they're going to remit the amount of money that was transferred to that fund over a period of years. I think it's $4,000 something a month. So this mismanagement of this agency has been continuing for many years. And I would like to read just briefly from a past employee. And he says, I was an employee of the agency from August 20th until my resignation in December of 2023, serving as a preservation associate. And what we have found is that History in Nebraska is not interested in recovering or restoring history. They're interested in writing history. And he goes on to explain some of the things that happened when he was terminated. And some of those things have to do with not allowing him to show up again at History in Nebraska sites anywhere unless he's accompanied by somebody or made an appointment. When people leave this agency, they're threatened and they have been intimidated by those people to leave. And so I think it's very important that we send a message to these people that are in charge of History in Nebraska that we will not accept or allow that to happen any longer. And so I would say that probably some of these things that happened recently with the money transfers that shouldn't have happened was under the auspices or the direction of the people that now serve on that board or work there. And so we have to make sure that when people trust History in Nebraska with their artifacts or their money, behind me that will help explain the need for us to make this a code agency. But I believe this is the way to fix this situation and bring some common sense management back to History in Nebraska. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Let's see if we have any questions before we let you go here. Questions for Senator Erdman? 69. All right, you'll stick around for close?
I will.
Please. All right. We are going to start with proponents to LB 1169. General Lemke, welcome.
Thank you very much, Senator. You remind me why I'm glad I retired. Thank you. Mr. Chairman and fellow members, I'm Lieutenant General Nebraska retired Roger P. Lemke, L-E-M-P-K-E. I was the director of the code agency known as the Nebraska National Guard and the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency from 2000 through 2007. Additionally, I've been president over time of 6 different local nonprofit organizations. From this and from my corporate and military leadership experience, it's easy to see that the Nebraska State Historical Society, i.e. History Nebraska, needs a different leadership model. I'm currently the president of the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation, so I have insight into the History Nebraska board and agency operations. I've also been a History Nebraska member for several years. To be clear, my remarks today are mine alone and a position taken by the foundation. Because of my foundation association and wide social network, I receive informal feedback from both prior and current History Nebraska employees and many concerned citizens about History Nebraska performance. The History Nebraska board function that I've observed over the past 3 years is very closed and non-communicative. To be effective, it needs to be exceptionally open to its members. A couple of examples. The website event calendar, if you look at it today, has only one item on it, which was last Monday's board meeting. Nothing else at all for 2024. So a member looking at that calendar gets no information about what's going on in terms of upcoming events for History Nebraska. The last board meeting minutes that are posted on the website go back to April of 2023. HN member has been asking the board, an HN member has been asking the board a number of times for specific deaccession information and still has not received clear answers to that. These are 3 examples. I could go on for quite a while. I tried to obtain a copy of the History Nebraska response to the 2022 auditor's investigation that was released also in August of 22, but was told it was privileged information. I finally received the report this week. The HN response to the auditor was never presented to the board and never reviewed and approved by the board as far as minutes show, showing really no more board involvement in the response to that investigation. The voting element of the membership is broken. Staff members have been given free membership and then encouraged to vote for the board's preferred slate. A free voting only membership category exists, but the HN website buries it. I would challenge you or any of your staff to try to locate and find out how to apply for a non-voting membership. A voting only membership, I'm sorry. In early 2020, Trevor Jones set out to establish a new foundation with assistance from HN board member David Levy. None of the major efforts involving the significant director activity here were reported or considered by the HN board. The first reference to the new foundation that he formed as he was an employee of the History Nebraska does not show up in board minutes until July of 2020 when it was announced. It was never discussed or acted on for approval by the board. Shortly after that, the Nebraska State Historical Foundation, us, were told that we were no longer to look at History Nebraska to help with fundraising. They're no longer going to be looking at us. In 2021, until this day, several HN board members, the foundation board members, also serve on the History Nebraska board. So you've got a duplication and potential conflict of interest. The board is not accomplishing the oversight, compliance, and leadership obligations that it should. History Nebraska is suffering from a lack of public and government trust. Reported to the board for discussion and action. Employees are operating in a fearful environment. They have been forced to participate in social adjustment programs that take away from focusing on their jobs, and that can be demeaning to them. A number have been pushed out, as previously reported, because of disagreement over History Nebraska operations. A board structure that only meets quarterly and is severely limited in the information it receives is not an effective model for getting History Nebraska back on track to accomplish its core mission. Am I allowed? Can I continue? I just got a little bit.
Go finish it up.
Okay. One last thing, the History Nebraska board has enacted significant salary increases for the agency, the one that's since left, and that's attached in what you've received. The 2021 salary information reveals that the director to be the third highest paid state director in Nebraska. 60 employees. When you've got other directors that are paid less with over 400 employees, indicating a lack of oversight on funding and funding management in the agency. LB 1169 is the one hope for getting History Nebraska back into a positive track for collecting, preserving, and making available history to Nebraska. The two aspects of this legislation stand out to me. The first, the legislature will be involved since it will be providing a confirmation of the nominee from the governor. The code agency, as a code agency head, the director will be able to establish very effective relationships with other code agencies and other parties within Nebraska. Putting the current board members in an advisory capacity, to me, will allow them to better interface with members and the public and have a better means of individually focusing concerns, ideas, and improvements back through the director for implementation. To your credit, LB 1169 adds conflict of language. Appreciate that. In summary, a strong History Nebraska is important to the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation. If they're there charging ahead, improving, getting better, and accomplishing and having the confidence of the people, we're there to help raise the money they need to be successful going forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, General. Let's see, when you commanded the combined Air and Army National Guard plus the civilians, how many folks did you have under your authority?
Oh my gosh. Well, when you look at the total numbers, we got up to around a little over 4,000.
All right, so it's safe to say you kind of understand how to manage people.
A few.
All right, well, let's see if we got some questions for you. Questions for General Lemke? Well, sir, I may not get a chance again, so just so everyone knows, when I was wounded in Afghanistan in 2003, the call that came back to Nebraska went to General Lemke, and then his job was to notify my family. So he was the one who had that responsibility, and I've always that he handled it with as much care and kindness as you could consider the situation. And then he made sure that for the next 6 months, while I was still in theater, that my family was taken care of. So when they say guard his family, he's living proof of it. Thank you, sir.
You bet. Families are important, aren't they?
It is.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Yes.
All right. We are working on proponents to LB 1169, and we'll get everybody here. We'll just keep here. All right. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Jeff Barnes. Keeping in the spirit of I'm from the fighting 13th of Northeast Omaha. But I am Jeff Barnes, JEFFBARNES. I'm a fifth generation Nebraskan and an author of several books on Nebraska and Great Plains history, humanities presenter, and past trustee of the Nebraska State Historical Society. I'm here to speak in support of LB 1169. John Gottschalk, former CEO and publisher of the Omaha World Herald, who became a friend through one of those book projects, once told me that policy is the realm of the board and management is the realm of the director. The society board, unfortunately, gave both realms to its past CEO, Trevor Jones, who created a culture of secrecy, distrust, and confusion accountable to no one. When I began on the board of trustees in 2012, the society was a small agency loaded with talent and experience, and there was an open collegial environment between the board director and the staff. Within 2 years of his hiring, Jones had forced out almost 20 employees who brought more than 300 years of service to the society. Remaining employees were forbidden to talk with the trustees, to other divisions, or even talk to the director without clearance from their supervisors and the director himself. When a few of us on the board of trustees blocked his plan for a no-bid $250,000 study unreported to our board, which would have violated state statute, he limited our oversight by having the president block us from executive and oversight committees. A code of conduct was initiated requiring each trustee to have a duty to loyal and obedience to the society and forbidding contact with the media or outside investigators such as the Attorney General, Auditor, or Senators. He killed all efforts to restore the permanent collection of the Nebraska History Museum after its renovation. As a result, there's no place in Nebraska to tell the story of the state, where visitors can come and learn our history. Its galleries automatically turn off the lights when no one is in them, and the galleries are typically dark. Jones also cut research hours of the state library from 6 days to 1 and assigned its research staff to unrelated tasks. In protest, I wrote my last 2 books without the resources of the state archives. Jones's hatred of clutter was well known, and he once told the Museum Association conference that he would gladly destroy hundreds of flags in his museum's collection if he only needed 5. There are eyewitness reports of his hiring a contractor to throw out valuable but bird-dropping covered artifacts from a warehouse at Fort Robinson without going through the deaccession process. Employees of the contractor were seen putting the more valuable artifacts in their personal vehicles rather than in the dumpsters for the landfill. None of these things would have happened without a weak, ineffectual board. I don't like the idea of the governor and legislature having more oversight, but I don't think the society board has the ability or willingness to set policies that are accountable to Nebraskans. The society, for more than a year and a half after Jones's departure, the board still hasn't hired his replacement and still follows his flawed strategic plan. Final sentence. I do think the increased oversight and daylight this bill offers can help restore the society to its role of preserving, protecting, and presenting the history of Nebraska. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, let's just back up a little bit because you got a lot packed in here. And so,
I could have gone for 30 minutes.
well, I understand that you don't,
Shoot
you
for
don't
3.
know when you come in here exactly how much time we're going to give you. But so you started in what year?
On the board,
Right.
2012.
All right. So you started, at the point you started, they had been in existence for what, roughly 20 years? No, about 12.
In its present
94
form. Yeah.
So at that point, things were kind of in a normal rhythm, and as far as being able to tell the story of Nebraska history and the items that they had in their collection and all that. And then over the period that you were there, as you went through this, weren't needed because, well, clutter or too much of it, or
Yeah, well, when I began on the board, the museum building was in bad shape. It was not up to code or speed what was needed. So we did seek and successfully achieved an $8 million renovation to the building, actually overrode a veto to get to that. And the intention was always to restore the permanent collection of Nebraska, which tells the story of the state. By the time that was completed, Mike Smith had retired, Trevor Jones had come on, but he had never restoration of the permanent collection back on track. In fact, I even introduced a motion at one of our board meetings to restore that collection within a 3-year period, which is plenty of time. And it convinced the board to vote against that. In fact, only Senator Nelson and myself, John Nelson. John Nelson was a board member at the time. He and I were the only ones to vote to bring back this to the museum. And I haven't been in it for a year. I don't believe it's come back at all.
you mentioned Fort Robinson. Obviously, you have my attention since that's in my district. We were out there last May, was it? And toured not just the facilities there, but the entire camp. One of the things that we felt needed to be done is to take and build a facility that would house all of that history in one place and have it so sequentially it was the history of the camp. And I think we set aside money to do that and do some other things at Fort Rob. As you have this collection of stuff, where do they keep most of it?
I could not speak to that. As I said, I was a board member, and we met quarterly, and I have a particular interest in the forts myself. I've written a couple of books about the military forts of the Indian Wars, and so Fort Robinson's always held a warm spot for me. But as far as how the society stored its collection on site, I was not familiar with that. I only heard about this drastic evacuation of the warehouse after it had been completed. And I'd since heard from several other people, including former or retired National Park Service people who had tried to stop that from happening out there as well. But their pleas fell on deaf ears as well.
All right, let's move on to questions. Questions. All right.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for the
very much,
testimony.
Senator. Thank you.
Jason, welcome back to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Colonel. It's my first time this session, so thanks for having me.
Well, you can go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon, Colonel Brewer and members of the Government Military and Veterans Affairs Committee. My name is Jason Jackson, Jackson, and I'm the Director of the Department of Administrative Services, and I'm here to testify in support of LB 1169. I did pass around an exhibit. I won't be speaking to that in my opening remarks, but I would welcome a question about it when we get to Q&A, and I'd also welcome a question about the fiscal note because I believe I could provide some clarity with respect to both of those items. We support LB 1169 because this is a government accountability bill, pure and simple. Okay, the bill arises out of the impropriety and the malfeasance of the immediate past director with respect to misappropriation of government funds and the intermingling of government funds and private funds and the audit findings surrounding that malfeasance. And we believe this bill addresses the root causes that were at work in that immediate past misconduct. But it's also important to recognize that this was a pattern over many years of issues with the Nebraska Historical Society, also known as History Nebraska. Going back as far as 2007, there was an adverse audit report related to about $500,000 in misspent funds on real estate transactions. Subsequent to that, which I believe Senator Erdman alluded to, the CFO of the agency actually faced criminal liability relating to some of his misconduct. And then, of course, we have the immediate past director's misconduct. And in the intervening years, a number of audit findings related to just the infirmity in terms of their accounting and financial processes and controls. And so what brings me before you today is Administrative Services is responsible for accounting operations for the state, personnel operations for the state. And we see this bill as a vehicle to address those operational deficiencies within the agency, restore appropriate controls, and really appreciate Senator Erdman's leadership on that and taking that as a point of emphasis. The bill also reflects Governor Pillen's belief that we need strong government accountability in all executive branch agencies, code and non-code, board or commission, or led by a director, and strong financial controls. So Senator Erdman addressed it, but I'll briefly hit upon it. What does the bill do? 3 key provisions that will mitigate the risk of this type of impropriety going forward. First, making the director an appointee of the governor and confirmed by the legislature. We think that if the director is accountable to Nebraska's elected leadership like yourself, that will restore a higher degree of accountability. Secondly, preventing the director from serving on both a private charitable organization as well as head of the agency. We think that's an inherent conflict of interest. We think that contributed to some of the underlying issues that were experienced, and we want to foreclose the possibility of that happening. And then third, it significantly increases the rigor around reporting requirements and requires gubernatorial approval of financial gifts over certain financial thresholds. So collectively, we think this bill takes substantive steps to restore Nebraska's trust in the agency, restore strong operational processes, accountability, and operational oversight. I'll conclude just briefly with a couple words of gratitude. First, to Senator Erdman for his leadership on this issue. And I also want to thank the Auditor of Public Accounts, Mike Foley, Craig Kubicek, and the entire APA team. But for their work, some of this malfeasance might not have been discovered. And I will just note that Craig Kubicek with the Auditor's Office is prepared to testify behind me in a neutral capacity and is best positioned to answer any specific questions about the audit findings and some of the improprieties that happened there.
All right, thank you. All right, if LB 1169 becomes law, this puts a bigger monkey on your back, does it not? As far as oversight or being accountable for more stuff, more people.
Colonel, I'm not sure I would characterize that way. It's interesting just looking at history in Nebraska as kind of as a creature, right? It's a strange governmental creature that's at odds with any other agency and state government that I'm aware of. So you have, first, it's a pretty large organization. Okay, so we see boards and commissions leading agencies elsewhere in state government. For example, we're all very familiar with the commodities boards. And those are agencies of one or perhaps two people. This is an agency, I know General Lemke referenced 60 people. The last figure I saw was nearly 100 people in this organization. So a lot of employees, operations across the breadth of the state, an $8 million budget. So it's a significant operation, and it's very atypical in Nebraska government that an agency of this size and complexity would be led by a board or a commission. And more strange, or at least at odds with common practice, is that it's led by a board of trustees, of which only 3 are gubernatorial appointees. And that is the only intersection of elected leadership interjection into the process here of overlooking this board. So a minority of the board members are gubernatorial appointees. The rest are selected by the society at large. So a very kind of strange creature of that. And Colonel, I just also say, Senator Erdman's remarks notwithstanding, I don't have any reason to impugn the integrity of any of the existing board members or any of the existing leadership at the agency. That's not our objective here. Our objective is just to make sure that the agency is set up for success going forward and has the right organizational structure it can succeed, and that the right incentives and controls are in place such that we can have reasonable confidence in its enduring success. I think that kind of touches upon your question, Colonel. From an operational standpoint at Administrative Services, we regard all agencies as our customers. We extend the breadth of our full support across our entire portfolio, whether it's procurement operations, accounting operations, personnel operations, indiscriminate of whether you're a code agency or a non-code agency. So from our perspective, in terms of the level of support the agency would receive, they continue to enjoy our full support now, and they would expect our continued support if they were to become a code agency.
All right, thank you for clearing that up. Now, one other one before we let you get to the questions. The sheet you handed out here, it's got 3 blue columns.
Yep.
Help me to understand the significance of each of those.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked. So this is part of the strangeness associated with this agency right now, and part of the strangeness, or one of the root causes that we believe contributed to some of the financial malfeasance and the conflict of interest. So here, and you heard both Senator Erdman as well as General Lemke testify to this. In the center column, you have the Board of Trustees for History Nebraska, or the Nebraska Historical Society. That is the current leadership of the state agency, Nebraska Historical Society. The left column, as you're looking at it, is the longstanding legacy charitable foundation that preceded even Historical Society becoming a state agency, and has had a longstanding mission of supporting the Historical Society statutory mission. That's the group of which General Lemke is a member. On the right column, this is the organization that the prior director set up on his own initiative. And I'm being just a little conversational, but this is the new organization that for which that was really at the issues surrounding the conflict of interest, the intermingling of public funds with private funds, and so what this is attempting to illustrate is that this is very much still an enduring issue right now. You have leadership that is intermingled between this a rival charitable foundation. You have the current director of the agency in a board position over the charitable organization. And again, I presume everybody's altruistic motivations. I'm not making any effort to impugn anybody's motives or suggest that anybody on that list of leaders is anything other than altruistically interested in history Nebraska. What we're attempting to illustrate is the potential for a conflict of interest going in the future very much persists if we don't take a substantive step today to prevent that from happening.
All right, you've got 5 lines that run across there.
Yep.
That just indicates that they're on both of
Correct.
those. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's see what questions we have. Questions for, oh, yes, Senator Conrad.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Jackson. Good to see you as always.
Likewise.
And I know because of your expertise and training as an attorney as well, I want to ask a host of rather precise questions to make sure that I can get my head around some of these issues. And I'm albeit a bit rusty because it's been a while since I sat in the Appropriations Committee, but from that experience, I think there's maybe just shy of 80 state agencies or something like that.
Sounds strangely correct.
Ish. And they're usually, we kind of, your code agencies, your non-code agencies, and your independent or constitutional agencies. Is that kind of a fair grouping generally of how we conceptualize our state agencies in Nebraska? And I might be missing it, or maybe they've updated the terminology since
We
I've
still
been
use
gone.
the same terms. Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. Do you have a sense, and I don't know, I could go back and look at the state legislator's guide, roughly how those classifications break down over those 80 agencies? Is it a third, and a third? Is it 50%? So, I'm not sure if I know. It's
Change in recent years.
Oh, okay.
We've combined, when we did consolidation, for example, with the Department of Energy. We had
Right,
consolidation
right.
with Veterans Affairs. We had Aeronautics, Joint Department of Roads,
Yeah.
Department of Transportation. If my memory serves me, there's currently 17 or perhaps 18 code agencies.
Okay.
So and then
rest.
just term of art, code agencies would be an agency that operationally reports up to the governor. That's the subject of this bill, is to make History Nebraska Historical Society a code agency. As between constitutional agencies or non-code agencies, I couldn't say the exact breakdown.
Well, that's impressive and specific. Very, very well done, and far better than I would have had off the top of my head. So that's helpful. Okay, so this is kind of helping me to figure out what's going on here, I guess, or what the problem is, and trying to figure out what the best remedy is. I mean, I think there's no doubt we all care about the mission of History Nebraska. We're all very proud of our history in Nebraska and should tell those stories robustly, and want to make sure stories and the means to tell them are appropriately stewarded. I know that my office has received over the last couple of years a lot of complaints from constituents who are concerned about the lack of access to the collections for their various and sundry research endeavors. And of course, I've read the headlines that we've all read about some of the issues that have happened in the agency as well. So what I'm struggling with, though, Director, is trying to figure out how changing the agency classification prevents against employee mismanagement or even criminal wrongdoing, because that in and of itself is not an inoculation against those things, right?
Well, I wouldn't say, thank you for the
Sure,
question, Sarah.
yeah.
I wouldn't say any one of these things is a complete inoculation against the risk of employee wrongdoing. And so
Yes.
what we looked at is, in totality, we don't see these types of issues in code agencies. We generally think the level of, and I'll just, again, return to the nature of the complexity of this operation.
Sure.
It's a large agency. And again, I addressed briefly that I didn't want to impugn the integrity
Yes,
of any
of
of the
course.
leaders there. I also don't want to disparage their leadership acumen. That's not my objective either. But to say that an organization that's 60 to 100 people, again, the figure I saw this morning, I think was 97, $8 million budget, can be operationally managed by a board that meets quarterly. I mean, that's a lot of operational complexity. And so when I think about the advantages of being a code agency, the operational rigor associated with its management of its day-to-day operations and the support of the administration, as it gets to the malfeasance, I think it's about the accountability and the accountability to this body in terms of the confirmation process, and accountability to the governor in terms of the position serving at the pleasure of the governor. Certainly, if either in this administration or the prior administration, this type of misconduct had occurred under the watch of either Governor Ricketts or Governor Pillen, that would have resulted in an immediate termination. I can say that with certainty. But when you have instead the agency being led by a board, and I think it's a board of 13 individuals, of which only 3 are gubernatorial appointees, and that's the only intersection of operational oversight by any elected leadership in the state, it just proved insufficient to hold the leadership of the agency accountable when confronted without malfeasance.
Okay. I mean, but just to push back there for a minute on operational complexity, Game and Parks, for example, is a non-code agency with a huge budget and a huge amount of staff spread out all across the state. Now, I know Senator Erdman has some ideas about Game and Parks that he's been very consistent about, but just to kind of push back there, it's perhaps not accurate to say that History Nebraska is a sole outlier in regards to operational complexity for a non-code agency. Right?
Perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. The other piece then, in going back to, and I do appreciate the oversight and an engagement between the appointment process and the confirmation process. And I think that strikes the right balance for legislative oversight and executive function in a lot of ways. So I hear what you're saying there, and I like where you're headed there. But where I'm struggling is this kind of general sense that somehow or another, if you're a code agency, there's no waste, fraud, and abuse. And I just don't think that is an accurate reflection of what's happening in state government presently or historically. I mean, I think it goes without saying that some of our most complex and most troubled state agencies, including the Department of Corrections, the Department of Health and Human Services, et cetera, are code agencies. And that classification alone has not prevented or stopped waste, fraud, and abuse in government.
I would certainly agree. I would agree that you have waste, fraud, and abuse. We have humans everywhere, right?
Yes.
Mistakes happen, and so what this bill is putting controls in place. And being a gubernatorial appointee certainly isn't sufficient to immunize somebody from making mistakes.
Yes.
Neither is the legislative confirmation process a surefire way to prevent somebody that we're going to get a great person in every instance. But as I just survey the landscape of the relationship between the administration and the body, and even those agencies that you referenced, the level of legislative and executive branch rigor that's applied to those agencies when confronted with issues that are either of policy, I haven't seen a comparable level of focus on agencies that are led by boards and commissions. And certainly we didn't see the board that's currently in charge of History Nebraska exercise that same degree of rigor and accountability that we've seen exercise with respect to code agencies.
Okay, that's helpful. And then my last question is just more to the remedies, right? Recognizing that perhaps there has been an issue here. I'm trying to sort through why this remedy is preferable when we've already talked about and documented that audits have uncovered wrongdoing or waste, fraud, and abuse, as they should, which is helpful and appropriate. The criminal justice system has intervened when there was a reason to intervene, right? And that's currently being sorted out through the court system now. So the Attorney General has inherent original jurisdiction over nonprofit institutions, including the ones organized around History Nebraska, to ensure that those directors are doing their due diligence. We've got audit, we've got criminal justice system, the AG's got enforcement power. And it seems that these remedies in many ways are actually working to a certain degree to bring these issues to light and ensure accountability. So it's hard to tell from the outside, but being around the nonprofit sphere and state government sphere for a while, it feels like this is a problem with a lot of leadership turnover over the years and hitting some road bumps and maybe some turf battles between the different boards out there. I don't know, maybe that's not a fair assessment, but I'm not understanding this particular remedy to address the issues that have been identified. Do you know what I'm trying to say there? And I see that you do, and that's your conclusion and the governor's conclusion, that you think that this will help to advance additional accountability. But I'm just not sold on that yet with a host of remedies that are available under the law. So I'm just thinking out loud and trying to process that, and appreciate your dialogue.
Yeah, my pleasure. If I might respond.
Please, yes, please.
I would agree that it seems like those remedies have worked, are working. But I would also observe that it feels to me like those remedies are reactive, and what we're talking about is prospective and preventative. And putting controls in place such that this impropriety would be stopped in its tracks or deterred or otherwise just never even contemplated, because the conflicts of interest wouldn't even be permissible.
Okay, that's really helpful. And that lists perhaps even another one. If there are existing laws related to financial conflict of interest or otherwise, and maybe we're just talking more atmospherically instead of an actual violation or conflicts for attorneys, or what conflict, just generally help me understand the conflict that you're talking about. An actual financial conflict, legal ethical conflict, or just a general messiness between these boards?
But probably the latter, but I think it's foreseeable and contemplatable that if a agency leader, I'm not aware of any other instance where it would be permissible for an agency leader to be the leader of an agency and also be the leader of a charitable organization or a nonprofit organization, to be involved in fundraising on behalf of your agency, to use the state website and state resources for private fundraising. When I looked into this issue, this was a matter of first impression to me, encountering these types of behaviors. And it's just completely at odds with my general expectations of executive leadership in state government. And so we just looked at, hey, what are the anomalies here in terms of the leadership structure, and what types of fixes could be done to prevent that type of behavior into the future?
That's very helpful to have those specific examples. Thank you. I understand where that's coming from, and that is probably really important to clarify and deal with. Thank you. Thank you.
Since we used the example there with Game and Parks. So if Tim McCoy was to, as the director of Game and Parks, if he was to be mismanaging funds, who would be the check and balance on him? Would that be internally within Game and Parks? Or how would anyone know if he was having a behavior that was similar to what we see with both the directors here?
I'm not sufficiently familiar with Game and Parks' operations. It's not a code agency, so it's outside the.
I'll just hold that
Yeah.
question for Erdman when he comes.
Yeah.
Okay, questions for Jason?
I would welcome a question on the fiscal note if.
Oh, yes, we need to know more, please.
Thank you, Senator Lowe, for asking about the fiscal note. The fiscal note prepared by History Nebraska was completely at odds with the administration's expectations as to the costs that they would actually incur were they to become a code agency. They identified, I believe, about $169,000 in costs, which they largely attributed to OCIs. I personally spoke to the OCIO controller just this week. He assured me it was his expectation that the agency could be brought into the fold, minimal costs, with most of their legacy systems in place. Exceptions being server upgrades, things like that, where there were security protocols that were at odds with current best practices. But those would be expenses they could expect to incur in the future anyway. What's more is the OCIO's office expected that this will be a net cost savings for History Nebraska. Because they will enjoy the support of the OCIO's office rather than having to insource their IT resources. So because I think that there would be a cost with just moving an agency organizationally or changing its leader. It was at odds, I think, with these expectations and was certainly at odds with the administration's expectations.
Okay, outstanding questions, sir. Well, thank you. All right, any other questions for Jason? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, team.
All right, come on up. Oh, well, whoever's a proponent to 1169 and is available, come on up.
Yes.
Cindy, welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Excuse me that Cindy, some of my notes will not match what I'm sending around because I've added some additional things. Chairman Brewer and members of the Government Committee, my name is Cindy S. Drake. That's C-I-N-D-Y, initial S, Drake, D-R-A-K-E. I am a proponent of LB 1169, regrettably so. I am a German American who is living on a farm in Cass County that's been in my family for over 125 years. I have other German ancestors who were in Cass County before 1860. The memories of our Nebraska ancestors are under threat due to the previous administration of the State Historical Society, currently branded History Nebraska. Nebraskans today are the prodigy of a hardworking and determined people. The sacrifices and accomplishments of past Nebraskans deserves to be preserved, respected, and carefully curated for future generations. Unfortunately, History Nebraska, in my opinion, is failing at this important mission. There are three fundamental reasons why I believe this is happening. First, History should not be a taxpayer-funded social justice organization. It appears to me that History Nebraska has adopted a more personal agenda. However, despite the so-called fair treatment and full participation of all people, the facts indicate that at least 80 employees resigned or retired from History Nebraska between 2016 and 2023. And in my opinion, were not treated in a professional manner. Secondly, I feel that History Nebraska should not be allowed to become a resume mill. That is to say, Employees and leadership should not develop the organization to serve their resumes rather than the state of Nebraska. As a taxpayer speaking on a matter of public concern, that is not appropriate. Thirdly, and most importantly, the agency seems to suffer from old-fashioned mismanagement and potential waste of taxpayer funds. It should not be allowed to develop a cult mentality relationship between past and current leaders. I strongly believe the educational system needs to be changed. Our heritage matters. Our history matters. I'm asking you today to honor our grandfathers and our grandmothers, no matter what ethnic race, as well as the Native Americans who came before them. I'm asking you to honor their memories by ensuring the State Historical Society is properly managed. We need to leave the work of diversity, inclusion, and gay pride to others who are tasked with such missions. History Nebraska, which should still be known as the Nebraska State Historical Society, must be tasked with preserving the history of all Nebraskans and not demean or revise the history of our ancestors. I spent my entire 45-year career as the librarian of the Nebraska State Historical Society. I'm also a genealogist and a historian. I am passionate about restoring the true mission of the State Historical Society. Thank you for the consideration of my observation, comments, and opinions.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Cindy, can you give us a little more background on, so you worked full-time there
Yes.
as a librarian?
Yes,
And you started in what year?
1977.
And you finished?
I was forced to resign on March 17th, 2023.
You were there for probably as long as,
That's correct.
kind of walk us through the transition over time that the organization went through.
Well, the Nebraska State Historical Society was a state institution before 1994. And it originally started in 1878. And by 1994, there had been some issues that had arose in the previous few years. Basically, to summarize, the time was getting that the State Historical Society could not raise as much funding as it formerly had. And if it was going to be more in sync with the state of Nebraska government, there had to be some changes made. Now, at the time that the statute that went through in 1994 to make it a state agency, there had been some conflicts on the board. There had been sometimes the board was in disagreement on the directors that they had hired. We had had a long-serving director of Marvin Kivett, who's from Cass County, and he was well respected. After that, there was some changes that may have needed to be made, but the board was split on the next director and some of the things the next director did. We basically had a Nebraska author who stood up at an annual board meeting and was very dissatisfied with the director. So there was a split on the board. There was some that supported the director, some that didn't. So after that director left, besides the lack of money, that was not as much money anymore, they looked into then becoming a state agency. The thing is that when we became a state agency, There's various state rules and regulations that should have been put in place at the time. And the state of Nebraska tried to do it. But the deputy director, who later did the embezzlement, he kept coming to the Capitol and getting things his way of how to run things, basically because, he's it was a non-code agency. And he seemed to get by with this until 2007, when it finally came to light of what he had done. Mike Foley, his staff, they came in to clean things up. And at that time, though, with what they did, there was a seed of distrust that was planted in the State Historical Society. That seed of distrust laid dormant until 2016, when Trevor Jones was hired. That seed of distrust between the State Historical Society and state government, it then grew and by 2020, it came into full bloom when we have this next incident. I guess that's all I can say at this time.
Okay.
You have another question to direct, but
Well,
yes,
no,
when I was forced to retire, I was the longest serving employee at the State Historical Society.
Well, what we're trying to do here is kind of understand
Yes.
what has transpired, and we're getting bits and pieces from different testifiers, and to gel this together so you kind of have a true snapshot. That's what we're trying to do, just kind of fill in some of the voids there, and you've helped with that, so thank you. Let's see if we don't have some questions for you. Questions for Cindy? All right, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your written testimony.
And thank you.
Okay, we are still looking at proponents to LB 1169. All right, seeing none, we will transition to opponents to 1169. Welcome to the government.
Thank you. Chairman Brewer, members of the committee. I live at 6946 North 54th Street in Omaha, Nebraska, 68152. I'm currently on the executive committee of History Nebraska. Been there for a little over a year, so some of the things that you talk about, I've heard stories about, but I'm not sure where the truth lies in some of this. I want to say today that I've heard a number of accusations and a number of things that have gone back and forth about this agency and its mismanagement and so forth. But what I've heard really is that we're talking about three basic incidents. One that happened in 2007, another that happened in 2009, and another that happened about 3 years ago. And the one that happened about 3 years ago is currently being addressed and adjudicated. So where we are now, I have some concerns about legislation that you may write, because as most of you know, and I know it from being a legislator myself, that legislation can be a double-edged sword. And you can also have unintended consequences to the legislation that you may write. To me, I have concerns about the hearsay that I've heard a lot about, but I don't know that that hearsay is actually factual. And I don't think that this body ought to go into a situation where we're talking about changing laws or adding what some people have called accountability without understanding what the real issue is. Chairman Brewer, I think you have suggested well that, what you're trying to do is figure out where this really is. And to me, I think where we are is with this particular group, I think you need to understand a couple of things. First of all, there's a lot of hearsay testimony that I think needs to be sorted out. The other thing I think that you need to recognize is that this agency is nationally recognized. We have national accreditation. So we have the Museum Association that has said that this organization is operating the way that it should be operating as it relates to how museums are supposed to operate. Now, if there's some other issues that need to be addressed, for example, we're talking about the last issue that occurred, that's being addressed. But in addition to that, we have the two bodies that are, as Senator Conrad talked about, they're two bodies that have been at war kind of like with each other. And what we have done is had a committee that consists of both groups sitting down now in an attempt to work out the differences so that we don't have to go through this whole thing over again. I'm concerned about writing legislation that right now, based on hearsay, based on a couple of circumstances that happened 8 or 10 years ago, one that happened more recently that's also being addressed. Okay, that's also being addressed. I think we need to be looking at that a little bit more seriously. I think there are other ways to get at it than writing significant legislation, because in one instance, you have to be looking at what the state wants, and the other instance, you have to be looking at what will continue to get us accreditation. And in some instances, we need to know what that is. So I think it's important for us to step back a little bit, look at some of the things that have occurred, do some investigation about what has been said, but has not at this point been proven, and then go from there. I think we're moving too fast. I think we may do something that may solve what we think might be one problem, but as a result of solving that one problem, we may create 4 or 5 more problems. With that, I'll stop and answer any questions that you all might have.
All right. Thank you for your testimony, Ben. Let's see if we don't have questions. Oh, yes, Senator Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gray, for being here.
Sure.
On July 30th, 2020, not quite 4 years ago, it was announced to the NSHS board that the History of Nebraska Foundation had been recently established by Trevor Jones.
Yeah.
With the support of Dave Levy, a board member.
Yes. That's my understanding.
Why was this action by Mr. Jones not previously presented to the board members for discussion and approval?
I wasn't here then, so I can't address that. Like I said, I've been here a little over a year, just a little over a year, maybe a year and a half. But as far as the beginnings of all of that, I'm not aware of why that occurred or what the circumstances were, what the disagreements were.
Well, I agree we shouldn't act fast, but that's been almost 4 years ago, and I would question if that's been resolved.
Well, I think you have a committee that's looking at resolving that. So I don't think I would jump the gun until that committee has completed its work. And if there can be no agreement at that point, then I think you still have the opportunity to create and pass meaningful legislation after you've done a little work. I've heard a lot of hearsay, but I've not heard a lot of facts. And I think we ought to be able to understand what reality is and what the facts are before we start. For example, I'll give you an example. When we're talking about any member can accept the gift, that's not necessarily true, because the committee that you have to go through, and that committee determines whether that gift will be accepted by History Nebraska or not. And there's several criteria, both in state and as well as museum standards, that have to be met with that. So, I think that's where I sit concerned.
How long have you been on the board? You haven't.
Year and a half.
Year and a half. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Lowe.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Gray, for being here.
Yes, sir. Senator.
Have there been gifts accepted by one person and not the whole committee?
One person, someone can call me and say, hey, Ben, I got something I want to give to the History Society, History Nebraska. And I can say, okay, I'll recommend it, but it has to go to this committee for their approval before we can do that. So nobody can accept a gift without it going through the without going through this committee of the Historical Society first.
So that's never been done.
I don't know. I can't say to.
At
I
least
can't
for the
speak
last
to
year
that.
and a half.
But for the last year and a half, I haven't heard of it. No.
All right, any additional questions? All right, thank you for your testimony, Ben.
Thank you.
Okay, we are still on opponents to LB 1169. Come on up. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Nick Walter, Nickwalter. I serve on the Board of Trustees of History Nebraska, representing the 1st Congressional District. And for the last couple of years, I've been on the Finance Committee. I'm in my 2nd year on the Finance Subcommittee of History Nebraska. And I'm here to testify in opposition to this because of our, and I'm going to steal phrasing from a previous testifier, our strange creature. I really like that phrasing. Our strange creature, our non-code agency, 7% funded by state general fund money. 14% comes from federal grants and the like. And the rest is fundraising, fees, this sort of thing. And my concern is that if it becomes a code agency, that remainder will evaporate. Nobody gives donations to the Department of Insurance. Nobody leaves money in their will to DAS. So if we go to making it a code agency, pardon me, I'm very concerned that these other sources of revenue will dry up and we've created a burden on the taxpayers of Nebraska. And I have a couple different examples of donations that have been made in the past that I think would not happen to a code agency. We got $875,000 in ARPA funds from the city of Lincoln and Lancaster County in the last couple of years. Just donations to support our mission and our museums around here that I don't think would have happened if we were a code agency. We got 1.9 million in private donation support for the renovation of the Ethel and Christopher J. Abbott Visitor Center, AKA the Chimney Rock Visitor Center. And just last year, we got $54,000 from the Gilchrist Foundation to do a play about World War II history. And that's a foundation that doesn't allow submissions for applications. They seek you out if they're interested. So I'm very concerned, and I believe the Board of Trustees is concerned about the funding of the agency, should it become a code agency, and about the burdens on the taxpayers in the state of Nebraska. The current climate of tightening belts, looking for ways to eliminate or create tax reduction and eliminate government expenditures. I feel like in that environment, and as a taxpayer, thank you for thinking along those lines, that this is not the best idea in the world in this environment. I see I'm out of time, so I'll stop there, and I'm willing to answer any questions.
All right, thank you for testimony. All right, so if we go back and look at the issue, the donations, did they come directly to the agency or to the foundation?
There's a variety actually there that happens. The majority of our fundraising in terms of charitable donations comes through foundations that support us. Just because they are the ones that are usually given the endowments or the donations to manage on our behalf.
Okay, so when a donation comes to the, does it come to History Nebraska, or does it come to Nebraska State Historical Society when they make donations? How does that?
Little column A, little column B. So I would say, though, the majority, to give you the fairest answer to your question, Chairman Brewer, is that the majority is going to come to a private foundation, usually because such monies come encumbered with, this money is for this purpose, and they want a third party to oversee that we are taking it in and using it for that purpose.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna ask some questions. Questions, Senator Lowe.
As far as donations coming in,
Mhm.
to Senator Erdman's chagrin, the Game and Parks gets donations
Mhm.
of land and things like that.
Correct.
And they're a code agency. Or they're an agency under the.
They're a non-code agency, is my
they're non-code.
understanding.
They're non-code, but yes.
Yes. Yes.
But they're still approved by the legislature.
Correct.
The commissioners and appointed by the governor.
I do not know a lot about the how Game and Parks is run, so I'm going to refrain from commenting.
Same with the Arts Council. So it'd be kind of coming into those same lines.
Well, I think right now as a non-code agency, yeah, we exist in that same space. Is that the question? Yes, that we're allowed to take private donations. We're allowed to raise our own revenue. Our members, most of our members pay a fee every year for their membership, which comes with certain rights to museums and other things. So those sources of revenue and donations are my concern today.
How much land does the History Nebraska actually own and manage?
I do not have the number available. I can get it for you very quickly. I believe it's a sizable amount. There's a good amount of properties and so forth that get donated to us.
Okay, additional questions? Yes, Senator Hall.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walters, for being here. This is off that subject that you were discussing.
Mhm.
Between 2016 and 23, about 7 years, 80 employees were dismissed, or there was turnover of 80 employees. For the size of that agency, that's pretty considerable. What's your opinion of why there was such a large turnover?
First off, I, like the previous testifier, have not been on the board for a long couple of years, so I don't want to speak with great authority to something I was not a firsthand eyewitness to. But I believe that just going to the documented facts, I mean, some of the stuff we talked about in the past, the issues, the legal issues, those are real, right? Those things happened. And I think that there's a need to, as others have suggested, exercise greater institutional control, stabilize the organizational culture. It's very hard to retain employees when a director resigns suddenly under a cloud of legal charges. You have an interim director, your budget's shrinking. It's very difficult as an organization, and this is something we've discussed in the board, to go out and advertise for jobs in these fields. Especially in the Historical Society, we have a variety of, I think, very specialized positions, curators and so forth. People who have their choices of employment in many states, not just Nebraska. So that's actually been a very top of the mind concern for the Board of Trustees this year is to make sure that there's that stability, issues are resolved, and the organization can start to thrive again.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any additional questions? All right, thank you, sir, for your testimony. All right, we are still on opponents to LB 1169. One more time. All right, who might be here in the neutral capacity for 1169? Come on up. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. For the record, my name is Craig Kubicek, CRAIG KUBICEK, and I am the Deputy Auditor with the Nebraska Auditor of Public Accounts. Just to start, I'd like to point out our office generally does not try to get involved with positions of policy and those decision-making matters. However, as you're aware, we were directly involved with a case that questioned the former director in diverting funds away from History Nebraska. As some of you might know, our office follows government standards with performing our audits. And so in a regular audit that we perform, similar tests are going to be performed no matter how the director was appointed, hired, or if they're a code agency or not. We're going to test, similar procedures, whether those are, how those are perceived or not. So that being said, I wanted just to point out, I think some of these have been highlighted already by past testifiers, but in 2007, our office issued an attestation report regarding fraud of the former deputy director. In 2013, our office again issued a report of the society, including lack of controls. In 2018, our office issued a similar report with similar findings. And then in 2022, our office issued a letter to History Nebraska alleging the former director had violated certain criminal statutes for intercepting checks intended for History Nebraska and instead depositing them into a foundation he had control over. I'm just going to bring your attention to the handout that I provided. Just go over it really quick. The page 1 is the history of, it's a request form for funds from the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation. Pay attention to the name of the funds. There's specific funds, agency funds that are included in their archaeology fund, conservation fund. Those are funds of History Nebraska. And the specific request was for funds to offset anticipated loss of Q4 revenue due to COVID and to send payments to History Nebraska. Now, if you turn to page 2, we have a copy of that check. One of the checks that was issued, it was paid to the order of History Nebraska. They're in the check on the, you have the back of the check, which was personally endorsed by the former director, personally endorsed for deposit into the History Nebraska as opposed to the historical or History Nebraska, the state agency. Page 3 is just another check, similar example. In this case, though, somebody had stamped it, pay to the order of State Historical Society. That endorsement was crossed out, and then it was personally endorsed by the former director. So I just wanted to bring those couple things to your attention. The Historical Society Foundation used some of these funds to pay the law firm of the former board president for legal services. To our office, it seemed pretty clear that these funds were requested by History Nebraska for COVID purposes and should have been deposited as such. At the History Nebraska budget hearing on March 1st, 2023, the interim director explained the decision to divert these funds by noting they conveyed the funds to an extremely safe place for this money to rest while they saw the pandemic play out. She went on to note that History Nebraska Foundation was a new entity at the time, and they started using the funds. History Nebraska Foundation started using the funds. Our office would question why they would be putting funds in an account to rest, but then turn around and use those funds at the same time. It would seem contradictory to do so. The former director was charged with theft by deception on June 16, 2023, and that case is still ongoing. And so in conclusion, Auditor Foley and our office appreciate those parties involved who are concerned with ensuring there's an active approach to audit findings and looking at possible solutions or controls to add oversight over these agencies. Thank you for your time today, and I will be open for any questions the committee may have.
All right, thank you for your testimony. I could have started you, but you're on a roll. I didn't want to break it. So if I take the two checks and add them together, $595,852.30. So in a period of, because the first check is dated 06/24/2020, second one 07/07/2020. So in a matter of a month, the two combined was almost 600,000.
About 270,000. It's the one check's only $325.
Oh, I had digits off here.
Yep.
Oh, well, that makes it, well.
Yeah, it was.
Still doesn't make it good.
It was like a dividend
It's better.
check.
That.
So they had requested the full balance, and so it was like the remaining funds that were in that account.
Got it. All right, let's see if we got questions for you. Questions? All right. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And this. All right. Any additional neutral for LB 1169? Seeing none, we will invite Senator Erdman to close and read into the official record. We have 4 proponents, 18 opponents, 0 in the neutral. With that, Senator Erdman, please close on LB 1169.
Thank you, Colonel Brewer. I know it would have been inappropriate, but I wanted to clap after you spoke to General Lemke. I appreciate that. So Director Gray, or Board Member Gray said that the things that were said here were hearsay. When you say General Lemke is speaking hearsay, that may be a false statement. I think that those other testifiers weren't saying what they thought was hearsay, but facts. So when Mr. Walter came up, he indicated that the donations would cease to come in because we made them a code agency. That's hearsay. He has no clue or no idea how to prove that. General Lemke mentioned that the Foundation is there to raise money. They will raise money for the History of Nebraska or the Historical Society, whether it's a code agency or not. Senator Holleran asked the question, why did 80 people leave? I think Mrs. Drake explained why 80 people left. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The testimony today is more than enough proof. More than enough proof to answer any questions as to why we should move forward making this a code agency. It has been told to me that many at the Historical Society now believe that Erdman has 1 year left. He's going to be termed out. Don't worry about this. This is going nowhere. He's going to be gone and people will forget this. Well, I got some bad news for those people. I'm considering making this my priority bill. This is a very significant issue. Significant enough that I may consider making it my. We need to make this agency accountable to not only those taxpayers, the taxpayers that contribute money, but also those who make donations. I think General Lemke explained very well what needs to happen. And when you have people like him and others, historians that wrote books about the history of Nebraska come in and tell you their concerns about what's going on, we need to pay attention to that. And so I would ask that you advance this because I'm very serious about making this my priority bill. I got one other bill that I'm considering, and if it gets out of committee, it's going to be a hard decision for me. But this is a significant enough bill. That's my thought. Thank you.
Yeah, let's see if we have any questions for you, or we'll let you go. Questions for Senator Erdman? Yes, Senator Conrad.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair. And thank you, Senator Erdman. It's helpful to know that this really rises to the top of your list in consideration priority bills. And I'm sorry if you covered this in your closing. I just had to step out for a family matter for a minute. But since you indicated that you were thinking about prioritizing this, I just want to be as clear and direct as I can so I know that what we're dealing with here. I don't think you'll have any disagreement that everyone wants to be good stewards of our history, public resources. You know, I'm still trying to figure out whether or not this shift in classification of agency is the right remedy to accomplish that, but I'm thinking through the pros and cons of that. But let me just ask it really directly. I'm not interested in re-weighting or wading into some sort of culture war battles about battling whatever wokeness or anti-wokeness is or whatever. I think that would be a distraction to a lot of the issues that we've been working in a really civil and collaborative way on together this legislative session so far, and it popped up in the testimony here. If this is brought in retaliation for viewpoints that you find distasteful, that would be impermissible and that would be inappropriate. If this is truly about dollars and cents, different story. So I want to give you a chance to respond to it because I want to know what I'm dealing with. And I know you're a straight shooter,
Yeah,
and you'll
right.
tell me.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Because you won't hide the ball.
I didn't bring that up.
Okay.
That wasn't what I thought. But
Okay.
let me just say this, that if you go to History Nebraska today over there and do a view, and I haven't been there this year, but they're not distributing and displaying the information that needs to be done there. This agency, this this group needs help.
Okay.
And the only way I see to get that done is to make it a code agency. And hopefully someone next year will make Game and Parks a code agency.
Very
Had to
good.
throw that in there.
Now, I would expect nothing less, and I thank you for your candor. Thank
But
you.
let me speak a little bit about Game and Parks as you brought it up.
I think this witness's time
The
is up.
difference, here's the total difference between History Nebraska and Game and Parks. All those commissioners are appointed and confirmed
That's
by the
true.
legislature, and they're not in History Nebraska. That's a big difference.
Great point. Great point. Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions for Senator Erdman? All right.
Colonel, thank you very much for your time.
And let's see,
Thank you.
read in our letters. All right. We've been at this going on 3 straight hours. We're gonna take a 10-minute break. So 20 minutes after, we'll reset and start on LB 887. I will hand